Welcome to Little Steps Big Gains. In this video, we are going to talk about ataxia. We're going to go over what the internet tells us and then what the ataxia community wants to teach us. So, thank you for coming. Let's get started. So first off, what is ataxia? Okay, ataxia means loss of order, and it is an impairment in coordination and balance. So, is that a symptom or a condition? It can be both, okay? An impairment in coordination. For example, that can be caused by a disease such as Parkinson's, where we have a deficiency in a neurotransmitter called dopamine that disrupts the communication between the brain and the body. Or multiple sclerosis, where we have nerve damage that disrupts the communication between the brain and the body. Both of those can have a lack of coordination and impairment there, and therefore the symptom of ataxia. At the same time, by itself, it can also be a condition or a neurological disease caused by degeneration or damage to a part of the brain called the cerebellum. So what is the cerebellum? Okay, the cerebellum is a part of the brain in the back that is responsible for executing, coordinating, and planning our movement. All right, it is Latin for little brain. So the way I think about it is the big brain in front sends signals or commands or information to the little brain in back, the cerebellum. And it is its responsibility to execute the plan. So if I'm going to take a step, it is the role of the cerebellum to decide the trajectory of that step, where it's going to go, the force of it, and the timing of it. That is a lot of responsibility. Not only that, but it also is responsible for correcting errors, okay? So if I'm taking a step and my foot is halfway in the air, that foot is going to send signals to the cerebellum and tell it where that foot is in space. The cerebellum needs to decide, is that where it's supposed to be? Because if it's off, the cerebellum is going to send signals to correct the errors so that my step can be smooth, okay? It also is responsible for remembering those errors to prevent them from reoccurring in the future, okay? So if we have hypofunctioning, damage, or degeneration in the cerebellum, we are going to struggle with executing our movements and correcting the errors in them. Now, some of the early signs of ataxia include things like unsteady gait, balance impairments, lack of coordination, slurred speech. Now, ataxia can be acquired via something like a stroke, head trauma, brain tumor, vitamin deficiency. It can be acquired, but it can also be inherited. There are many groups of genetic disorders that are known. For example, spinocerebellar ataxia is inherited, and it has 40 known types. However, there are still so many unknown types of inherited ataxias. We need more research in this area. And this is also important because just because somebody has ataxia does not mean there is a history of substance abuse or alcoholism, okay? One man wrote to me and said, just because I have cerebellar atrophy does not mean I'm an alcoholic. I don't drink, okay? So ataxia is not the consequence of irresponsible choices. Another gentleman wrote to me and he said, ataxia chose me. I did not choose it. Now, all that information can be found via an internet search. If we really want to learn about ataxia, we need to listen to the people who live with it. So for that reason, I reached out to 6 different ataxia groups and I asked them, I said, what is something you want others to know about ataxia? And these are the 5 top responses. Number 1, ataxia is so much more than just problems with balance and coordination, okay? It affects so much more. So it can affect an individual's speech because of the coordination of muscles required around the mouth with the diaphragm. So an individual with ataxia may have slurred speech or slowed speech. It can affect deterioration of the fine motor control of the hands or tremors. Eye movement abnormalities, coordinating those eye movements, causing double vision. It can cause dizziness because of impairments in coordination with the vestibular system. One individual wrote, he said, it's like turning in a circle a dozen times and then try to walk through a doorway or pick up some keys. That is what it feels like. Ataxia can cause freezing, okay? We hear about freezing of gait with Parkinson's disease where your feet are kind of glued to the floor. Ataxia can also cause that. Heart problems. Fatigue was a very common response, and this makes sense since our cerebellum is supposed to remember our errors. So if you have ataxia and you're not remembering those, you have to think before you step. That is a lot of concentration. It can be very mentally taxing. You're also struggling maybe with over or undershooting. That's physically very, very taxing. So it can be then hard to concentrate or make decisions. Ataxia affects so much more than just balance and coordination. Number 2, just because an individual may speak slower or walk slower does not mean they are cognitively impaired. As one gentleman wrote, he said, having difficulty with speech does not mean having difficulty with understanding. Another woman wrote, she said, even though we are physically disabled to some extent, we are mentally capable. So, an individual with ataxia may have a physical limitation, but that does not mean they are cognitively impaired. Number 3, symptoms vary day to day. This was a very common message for us. One woman said, one day I might look normal and the next day be completely unable to walk unassisted. Another woman wrote, she said, most days you can't see how wobbly or shaky I feel on the inside, and then other days I look like a walking seizure. Those were her words. And I have seen this myself. Recently worked with an individual with a cerebellar stroke. In the morning, unable to really even get out her breakfast menu with her slurred speech. In the evening, speech is perfectly clear, and I have to explain, she's not putting on a show. It's just that symptoms fluctuate and they vary day to day. Number 4, I am not drunk. This is a very common message I receive from the ataxia community. And I have read story after story of individuals getting reported, accused, pulled over for being intoxicated because of slurred speech and unsteady gait. The problem with this is if you see an individual with a broken leg, it's so easy to be empathetic. You see somebody with slurred speech and unsteady gait, and it's so easy to be judgmental. And this is where we need to increase our awareness so that we can preserve dignity. And number 5, don't underestimate us. The ataxia community is strong. I received so many messages of people saying, be patient, let me do it for myself. Just because an individual is slower does not mean they are weaker. I have learned so much from the ataxia community. They have taught me that you cannot project today's struggles as tomorrow's failures. I'm telling you, it is a community of warriors. So while ataxia is so much more, these are the top 5 responses I've received from the ataxia community. Thank you for coming to learn about what ataxia is and listen to the individuals who live with it. If you found something helpful or insightful, please press like below or subscribe. When YouTube sees activity, it is more likely to populate or share that video. If you have resources, books you've read, videos you've seen, please put them in a comment below. That way you can share with other people. In the description below, I'm including some great resources by Jonas Chepkowskis. He himself has ataxia and has some great videos and resources. Check them out. And last, individuals with ataxia often get overlooked. Please share this video so their voices can be heard.